Crickett Rumley. I am your panels coordinator, and I am the senior director of the Film Festival department at the New York Film Academy. And I'm so happy to be here for Tallgrass 2022 20th anniversary edition, which I really enjoy saying, and this is the last time that I get to say it. We have a really wonderful panel today about transitioning into film. And I'm so glad to see all of you here, and thank you for coming back, because I know this is on top of your mind. Also, I heard that it is our photographer Lester's birthday. Happy birthday, fellow Libra.
Thank you. It's tomorrow, but...
It's tomorrow? All right. Happy birthday. But I'm going to pass this on to James, who is our moderator and a filmmaker, and he's going to tell you all about our panelists and why we decided we thought this would be a good topic. And someone just said good luck. Did you hear that?
That's good.
Did you know that person?
No, but I'll take it.
Okay, take it. I'm going to go sit down and enjoy the show.
Hi, everybody. My name is James Kautz. I am a jury member this year for the shorts category here at Tallgrass. I also had a short film here last year called Frankie, which won the Narrative Short Award, and I'm extremely grateful and honored to be here and participate in the panel today. Today's panel is called Getting Started in Film, How to Transition into Production with Skills and Resources You Already Have. Very dramatic title, but very true. Just to introduce you to Sara and Harmon. Sara is the local director and producer and an adjunct professor at Wichita State University and Friends University. Charity is the local director, producer, and freelancer. The two sisters co-produced Who Scammed Raja Rabbit, which won. Give them a round. We also have Travis Payne.
Hi. No one gets it right on the first try.
Cool. Travis has been a photographer and a videographer at the Wichita Eagle and Kansas.com for 25 years. He is a college-educated photojournalist with self-taught video storyteller. He has made 3 documentary films since 2009. His most recent film, Once Was Lost, The 70-Year Search for Chaplain Emil Hall.
Kingdom, Capon, it goes either way.
Judges. That won a 2022 Regional Emmy Award for Topical Documentary. When he's not making news photos or documentaries, he's playing drums in a Wichita-based rock band. So, just to kind of get started and to feel out where our audience is, just by a show of hands, who has made a film before? I figured a good portion of our audience. Directing, producing, everything. Okay, give me that. Who has not? Who has not made a film yet, but might want to? Cool. All right. Well, for all of you who haven't, I'm sure we get a lot of great info from the panel. For folks who have made a film, you know, I've made 5 at this point, 5 shorts, and I feel like an imposter every time. So I would say they all kind of feel like first films in their own right. So hopefully some of these conversations will still resonate for you. I'm sure they will. Our first question for the panelists. I would love it if you could just tell us a little bit about what inspiration was for your first film, where it came from, and what were the first steps you took to kind of make it a reality. Yeah?
Sure, we can do that. So in terms of the Raja Rabbit one that we did last year, this was Charity's first, my second, in terms of putting the film together. So the way we came across this idea, in case you guys have never heard of it, it's a true story. It actually happened here in Wichita during the Great Depression. A guy came to the city around 1929, and he was like, hey, if you give me money, I'll invest in some really special hybrid, white rabbits. And that was a pretty big deal back in the day because rabbit was a pretty hot commodity in terms of food and furs and all that. So the city of Wichita was like, sure, we'll give you all of our money. And he took it all, ran off with modern day money, about $5 million, and left 55,000 rabbits just to fend for themselves. So that actually happened here in Wichita back in 1930. So that was what our film was about. Crazy story. So the way that we came across that, I guess the inspiration was just the story itself. I'm part of a female historian group, and one of the women that was presenting that month, we found out her father used to own a printing shop back in the same time period as this Roger Rabbit thing, and he likely printed out a lot of the brochures and the booklets for that, not knowing it was a giant scam. So she came across one of the original booklets after he passed away. She did a bunch of researching and digging about it. After she did the presentation, I was like, oh my goodness, we need to make a film about it. I told Charity, she thought I had made up the story. You want to continue there?
I was waiting for the punchline, and it never really came. But yeah, she had the book, she had a bunch of information that people had given her. There's actually a small display if you go to the Sedgwick County Historical Museum. I think it's the third floor. I think it's the third floor. There is a small display talking about the Roger Rabbit scam. One of the rabbit crops is still there, and they have some of the certificates and paperwork that obviously wasn't legitimate at all. But so we got the information, and I think Jamie, who is she's the head curator at the museum. She actually did some research for us while we were making the film. So she found out that, or we found out that he did some jail time. And so she actually got like his mugshot, which I found fantastic. And so just that information kept pouring in, and we just decided to make the film from there.
So for my first film, I guess, I don't know if inspiration is quite the right word. You know, I'm a newspaper photographer, and I'd say maybe around 2006, 2007, as the industry began to change, where newspapers shifted to becoming more online products, you know, I had people many rungs up the ladder from me say, oh, we need to start making videos if we're going to be like this online product. And then naturally they were like, well, let's just make the photographers do it. They know how cameras work. They would be naturals at this. And that's just not true, by the way. So I actually decided to embrace it, knowing that, you know, change is inevitable. But that just was, you know, me making really crummy minute-and-a-half, 2-minute long news videos. And then I started working on a project in 2009 about Father Payne. My first documentary was kind of the backstory of his life. For those of you who don't know, he's a Kansas priest who became an army chaplain, died in a North Korean prison camp in 1951, has since been awarded the Medal of Honor, and is a candidate for sainthood in the Catholic Church, so very well known here in Kansas. But what happened was, with a reporter, I went around the country and interviewed these POWs who were in this hellish North Korean prison camp with him. And I thought, there is no way that it would be a crime for me to take this stuff and try to cram it into a 2-minute long news video. Like, these are great stories. And so I just went to my bosses and I said, this is the craziest thing that you're ever going to hear. Just hear me out. I know we're a newspaper, but let me make a documentary. And they said, okay. And so I didn't know what I was doing. It went really well, but it was just like, it just became kind of and I think it was a bit of maturity and having been in the business a while, that there are certain ways stories can be told most efficiently. You know, sometimes it's with a still photograph, sometimes it's with written words. And this one, I felt instinctively was kind of crying out to be told in this format. So I took it on and went from there.
Awesome, thank you. And in terms of taking those first steps into building your actual film, if you could each just talk a little bit about maybe what were the initial hurdles that frightened you most, that maybe made you question, do I make a film with this? I think as filmmakers, there are so many boxes that we can check for why not to make a movie. You know, money, time, talent, of course, but just those initial, I don't have this skill, I have to learn this, do I want to do this? Do anything come to mind?
Okay, so a little bit of backstory about some of my college education. I actually didn't edit my first video by myself until 2 weeks after graduation, so that's not what you want to do when you're studying film. And so I found some YouTube videos, I had a job, kind of lied my way in, yeah, I can make videos, I can do all this stuff, and they hired me. And then they were like, okay, here's your first project, and I was like, crap, I should probably learn how to edit this thing, right? So I, looked up some YouTube videos, taught myself how to edit. Anyway, long story short, you were saying like what's something that sort of held you back. Sara and I have talked about this before, just the intimidation factor, especially being here at Tallgrass, where, the great thing is you're meeting so many great filmmakers and seeing all of the projects and all the things people are doing. The bad thing is you're seeing so many great filmmakers and you're seeing all the projects that they're doing, and you're like, oh wow, that's amazing. I don't know how to do that. And so the intimidation factor would kind of bring you back, or just the idea of like, well, someone else has probably already made this, there's no point in me making this film. So I think getting out of your head is a big thing before you start making a movie, especially if it's your first one, or if you don't have all the bells and whistles and all the equipment and stuff. Utilizing the resources is a good thing, but don't talk yourself out of it before you can start.
Kind of adding to that, I have to jump back about 4 or 5 years. Back in 2016, I was working a job at a TV company. I really wasn't enjoying it much. And another coworker was telling me about what ended up becoming my first film, talking about Wonderland Park, which was Wichita's very first amusement park. There was an island in the Arkansas River, that was where the amusement park was. And we were planning on partnering up, making a film about it. And literally after we decided to do that, we both got laid off of the same job. And that kind of changed the dynamic of it. I still wanted to make the film, but this was a big deal. I had no job, I had no finances, no software, no equipment, but I'm like, I'm gonna make a documentary, and because what better way to make a film when you have absolutely nothing in your arsenal to put something together. And I think that was a big thing for me, is just the fact that how can I make something when I really don't have anything? And thankfully, both me and Charity have friends. Well, we have friends, but we have friends with equipment, which is nice, that we're able to, when they're not using it, we can borrow it maybe a couple days here and there on a weekend, or a few hours or something here and there. And actually, I did the same thing with the first film, and we both did that with the Raja Rabbit one. At the moment, we're still kind of borrowing equipment until we're able to, we're slowly starting to save up money so we can be able to, get some new sexy equipment, a few $1 million, chump change. So the big thing for me was the confidence. Like I said, how can somebody that is unemployed at the time be able to want to make something? And then I just I let the idea kind of marinate in my head for about a year, because I was unemployed for about 1.5 years. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it. And it was one of those things like, I gotta stop being depressed. You can only stay in bed for so long. And I'm like, this was kind of my way of giving me a reason to get up out of bed in the morning. So it was a bit of that drive for that. So, and it's one of those things like you just kind of have to do it. I know that's not really, just get up and do it. But sometimes you kind of have to do that. Because you can easily talk yourself out of things, about not having the money or not having the confidence, but you're not going to know until you do it. And I always tell my students to work with what you have, so you might not be able to have the fancy equipment, but most of us have, a phone. We have a camera device in our pockets right now, whether it be an Android model or iPhone or something, but the audio parts and the video parts are actually quite nice. The phones have updated themselves in a lot better ways than even like 10 years ago. There's still room for improvement, but if you want to shoot something on your phone now, then you can do it, and there's a lot of free or reasonably priced apps out there that you can actually start doing some editing and stuff on. So in a way, you're not really starting with absolutely nothing nowadays. service. Because you can even get a cheap phone and do what you need to do with it. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
What I found, kind of pretty intimidating out of the gate was that I realized pretty quick that it was kind of like drinking from a fire hose. And then, in the sense that I've got all this stuff, and it's like someone backs up a dump truck, and there's a pile of dirt, and it's your job to go in and find the little gemstones in there. And that's really intimidating because, you're afraid you're going to miss one or something. So what one of the first things I had to learn was how to be better organized with the content that I was creating and, drawing in. And, there's a lot of, I won't bore you with the details, but I thought that this is going to be a lot harder than it already is if I don't find a way to get organized and learn how to catalog these interviews, because it's like you're sitting there staring at maybe 10 interviews that are anywhere from an hour to 3 hours long. How the hell am I going to find that one quote from that guy that I kind of remember but I don't? And so organization was a big part of it. And even the nice thing is, since then, this was 2009, and this time when I did it, now there are these like apps that will transcribe your whole damn interview for next to nothing. And it might not be totally accurate, but it's going to help you find where in your timeline that quote is. So those services weren't available when I started, but they are now. And back then you had to pay someone a transcription service to type it out for you. I ended up doing it myself. But organization was the most intimidating thing. It's just so much content. How do you make something, this big from all of this? And that was the hardest thing for me initially.
Yeah, and even with the advances of technology, I would love to hear from you all if there were any partners or artists or collaborators that you brought in that you found were integral to the process. I think we, as filmmakers, it's kind of a prerequisite now that we have to be able to wear multiple hats. If you're the director, you're automatically the producer as well. You're also the fundraiser. Perhaps you're in the film. You might wind up having to edit it because your editor quit, or you couldn't afford them. So I think even though we are used to wearing multiple hats, it can get very daunting. And we can forget to reach out and build that support community. In the making of the films, was there anyone that you found, or any team position that you found absolutely integral?
Well, lucky for me, I have my sister here, so we kind of come as a package deal, which is nice. But I would say, actually, my intern, Nathan, he's sitting back there. He's a Wichita State student. Sorry, Nathan. Something that I was telling him, since we do, she's a teacher, and she kind of sends me her students for interns, is that while you're in school, that try to make those connections, because having those team members are such a big part. And while you're on campus, you have access to equipment, and you have access to your teachers, and all of these people that once you graduate, you can still keep those connections and make films or work together on a project or whatever. So if that's something that you don't have, or even now as we're meeting all of these people here at Tallgrass, if you're passing out business cards, actually contact them, follow up with them, figure out what they do, look at their Instagram pages, video pages, whatever, and see, hey, could we team up and do something together?
Kind of adding to that in terms of collaborating and all that. Yeah, with both of us, definitely. Because at least the past 2 films we've done have been historical. While we definitely did pretty much all of the media end, we were able to collaborate with a lot of local historians in the city. So it's one thing for us to research the information, which is good, because it's good to know what you're going to be working on, your topic or whatever. But it's good to have somebody in the field that actually can confirm, yes, this really did happen in 1906 or something like that. So, I was able to get in really good with the historian community because with both films we had a guy named Jim Mason. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's like a Kansas encyclopedia. He knows the city and the state upside down and backwards. And so when a lot of people saw him on the film, they're like, oh, well, if he's in it, this has got to be legit. So it brought in a whole community of people. It has that credibility to it. So in terms of that, not even necessarily on a media standpoint, but just in terms of research and collecting information. So like thankfully with some of the visuals we have for the film, especially for the Wonderland Park film, Jim also collects vintage postcards. So we had original postcards from Wonderland Park from 1906, you know, which even adds more confirmation because it shows us it was actually there. You have tangible evidence in your hand. And kind of like what Charity was talking about with Raja Rabbit, you know, you actually see the crocks, the feeding containers there, the feeding bowls, and the certificates and all that. So it shows that we didn't just make this stuff up. It kind of adds that bit of credibility to it. But yeah, typically both of us do the media ourselves. And kind of like what you were saying, do you find yourself on camera too? Yes, at least for our projects. When I first did Wonderland, I wasn't intending on being in the film. I had already did my interviews, but I came across some new information while interviewing them, and I was able to get a couple of them to come back twice, but I don't want to badger people and be like, hey, can you come back for a third, fourth, eighth time? So then I ended up using myself as filler to kind of add more information or to explain things, and then that kind of became an odd bit of a trademark, I guess. So now it's like, oh, Sarah's going to be in her own film. So with both Wonderland and with Raja Rabbit, we're actually both in the film giving our information based off of the historic stuff too. So you might find yourself in front of the camera one of these days, so be prepared for that.
You know, as far as collaboration, on the first film I made, you know, I knew I was kind of in over my head. And so what I did was like, okay, I need to reach out to somebody that I know has done this before. And at around the time, so we're talking 2009, I was aware that the local PBS station had just made a documentary about the 1970 Wichita State football team plane crash called Black and Gold, and it was outstanding. And so I went to the two people at KBTS here in town, and I said, hey, I need some technical advice. And they were great about being a resource for me anytime that I needed that. But now that I'm a little further down the line, and maybe the technical stuff I've since figured out, I will say as far as collaboration goes, you know, I am that guy that I don't know if I'm a control freak or if I simply don't have the resources to help me, but I mean on this latest film that showed here this week, I mean I did everything. I had a little help from a fellow photographer, but I shot it all, I edited it all, I did everything except, you know, and I think, okay, I can learn, I'm a still photographer, I can learn video, I can learn audio, and even though I play drums in a band, I'm never going to learn how to compose really good music. I'm just not going to be able to do that. I mean, or if I did, it's not going to be very good. So in the last two films I made, and I'll talk about the second one at some point, because there's definitely like some pitfalls that I can, in wisdom I can impart upon all of you with that experience. But, you know, I think music is one of the most, for me, in my personal style, I think music is a character, no different than a person. Like, and that might just be my personal taste. So it's like, that's where my quest to develop relationships has been with musicians, studio engineers, producers, and I've made some relationships that I know I'll continue to cash in on the next time I make something.
Thank you. So I don't make docs, I make narrative films, and there are so many commonalities, but there are a few differences as well. I started as an actor, in other people's work, and I found working with directors how few of them actually knew how to communicate. Not just to actors, but to their team, how to articulate what they wanted, how to manage a budget or a schedule, all of those things that, as someone who never went to film school, assumed, oh, that's where you must learn these things. But once I was an actor in films, I realized, like, oh, that isn't the case. I think that those are integral skills that we absolutely bring from other walks of life. So I guess my next question is, having not gone to a four-year film school, as none of us have, what kind of integral skills did you find from other experiences that really made filmmaking possible? Travis, you want to take this question again?
So I went to journalism college in Nebraska. Knowing that I wanted to be a still photographer, but the curriculum of the journalism college that I was in insisted that I learn to write, and then I learned to edit copy, and then I learned to design newspaper pages, and all the stuff I knew I was never going to do, except it turned out I did, because now I have to design my own movie posters, and now I have to. But my point of saying this is there's something that I believe in deeply, which is, so even though we're doing documentaries and you are doing narratives, we're all storytellers. That's what filmmaking is. And I believe that, like, what makes you able to do that is having an understanding of narrative. How do you tell a good story? What is narrative? What's the narrative? How do you make this work? And I feel like a great foundation and knowledge of writing is key to it, because it's like the piano. It translates to, if you want to be a great musician, you gotta learn to play the piano. I feel like if you want to be a great storyteller, you got to read a lot, you got to write. And so I'm grateful that my education forced me to learn to write, and I wanted to be a still photographer, because when I make a documentary and I'm sitting there in that moment I described earlier, how am I going to do this? I don't think about it in terms of photography. I think about it, how would I write this? How would I write this story? I don't work from a script. So, I formulate it in that way. So I think that, that foundation is essential, and the other stuff will come to you as, just like, like there are moments in film, and I know that you all have this, no matter your level of interest in film. There might be a scene in a movie, and I think of these as still shots that inspire me even to this day. Like I still think of the scene from the movie Braveheart with the camera looking up in the air and the hand on the edge of the cross letting go of the handkerchief. And I just remember like wanting to cry when I saw that, because it's like, was such a beautiful still image. And so like, my still photography skills are a big part of my vision in filmmaking, but I think that, writing is the foundation, and without that, it's really hard to be a good storyteller. I know I'm not 100% right on that, but that's how it's worked best for me.
So you're saying skills that you picked up that helped you. Sorry, repeat the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just what skills from other walks of life or other disciplines have you found absolutely integral to your filmmaking, or very helpful at least?
Maybe not so much in filmmaking, but just like my everyday job of creating videos is one, being able to multitask. So something that I passed on to other people I work with is, while I'm doing an interview with someone, I'm actually pre-editing in my head. So like if someone's talking and I hear them mess up, I'll know, okay, I can't use that clip. Either think of what piece of B-roll can I put on top of that, what graphic can I put on top of that, how can I cut it, or what's another way to re-ask the question in the way that they don't know that you're repeating it, which I probably shouldn't be giving that in case I ever interview you one day. But so that's one thing. For the other videos that I've done, it's just being okay with having to do stuff on the fly. Sometimes I've been with people in meetings, and they'll say, what do you think about this? Or can we make this video? And within like 5 seconds, I have to go through my full process of, can I do this? Can I do this? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, you know, and knowing your skills enough to be like, yes, I can do this, or here's another way to do it, and being able to do that really quick. And I think that just comes with practice. Also, maybe, I don't know if I can say doing stuff off the clock, but you know, if I'm watching TV, I think I've ruined myself to the point that if I'm watching a movie, I'm sort of recreating the movie in my head, and that's just an occupational hazard. But you know, I think that gets you in good practice for when you do have to do something in a way you've already done it, even though you don't have to experience it, because you've kind of practiced that process in your head. So maybe multitasking, I guess, is kind of how we can put that all on the phone.
I think for me it's a couple of things. One, I personally think, I'm kind of biased in this, but I think filmmakers need to learn graphic design. I think that's a very important thing. I originally wanted to be a graphic designer before going into video production, but the school I went to, it seemed to make more sense to go into video, and honestly I did take that a little bit more naturally than graphics, but there used to be, and I think it's finally starting to kind of mesh now, but there used to be such an us and them mentality between filmmakers and graphic designers. Filmmakers do films over here, and graphic designers do things over here, and never between shall meet. But I feel like you have to kind of have both, because, you know, kind of going back with us having to do everything. Thankfully, my graphic design skills have been put to good use, because on top of editing and shooting and writing and stuff, we're also able to make, you know, graphics for social media. We can make our own business cards. You know, we can do some basic animation, you know, so kind of incorporating some of that stuff, making posters for your work. So, you know, that's one more thing to add to your arsenal, but I think graphic designing is really important. It's good to kind of learn that. Plus, depending on what kind of films you're wanting to do, maybe you kind of want to give it a graphic edge to it. You know, maybe you want to add a bit of 2D animation or some of that flat graphic, and you might incorporate that in your film. So it's kind of good to know that as well. And then I guess another part, talking about like, you know, getting into it and everything. No, I didn't go to film school, but both me and Charity did actually get legit like college degrees in video production. Now, for my school, and probably Charity as well, certain colleges, I don't know what it is about the arts, people want you to make art, but they don't want to pay for it, which irks me to no end.
Exposure!
Yeah, exposure bucks, that's doing us really good right now. So stuff like that I don't fully understand. So the school that I was at, I learned the fundamentals very well. And I think the fundamentals are one of the things that no matter how high in technology we get, they will always be the same. So you can have a multi-billion-dollar camera, but if you don't know what a close-up is, you're just making high-quality junk. You know, and because the school I went to, the equipment we were using was so old. And of course, after I graduated, they got like an $8 million grant, and they were able to update all their equipment. But no joke, we were using stuff from like 70s, 80s, 90s, way back, way when that was still kind of, you know, throwback stuff. So, you know, I mean, I can, not anymore, but I used to be pretty good with 1970s stuff, not anymore, but it's just the fact that, like I said, the fundamentals still change, or it's still the same. So at least I learned the concrete stuff, and that's the stuff I'm able to show my students. Like I said, the technology will change, but if you got to know the basic stuff, and it's all, you know the rules, and that way you can break them. You know, people always want to break the rules, but if you don't know what the rules are, what are you doing? So, you know, so I say a lot of things that I learned-ish, I guess, in school, and not really was, I think you need to have a little bit of knowledge in the graphic arts a bit, and for sure just know the fundamentals. That always helps.
Awesome. Should we open it up to questions? Does anyone in the audience have any questions about making films for the first time?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
I want to know more about why you decided to make films and what skills that you had as an actor or access to resources you brought to the table, especially at the beginning when you were starting to figure it all out.
Yeah, so I started in theater. I was the artistic director of an off-Broadway theater company, which feels very you know, akin to filmmaking, but it wasn't. It wasn't at all. My job was to produce other people's writing and raise all the money for the productions and build all the teams. Sometimes I would act in the shows, eventually I would direct the shows, but when it came time for me to kind of follow my actual passion to make a film, I felt totally ill-equipped for some reason. Even though I had worked for 2 decades in the arts with other people who were making or who were writing their own stories. And it actually wasn't until my first film that I realized, like, oh, I have these muscles. I know how to talk to people. I know how to build a team. I know how to raise money. So I guess all that to say is, I think for most filmmakers, maybe most artists, the thing that's actually standing in the way is our own fear or our belief, or our lack of belief in ourselves. That's what it was for me, for sure. But then, after my first film, I was like, oh, how do I do this for the rest of my life? Like, you know? And you cherry pick. You realize, like, oh, all those years of bartending, I was learning how to deal with, you know, assholes. And there's assholes on set, you know? Yeah, you know, negotiating the rental on a theater is the same as negotiating the rental on, you know, a location. All of those things. Like, that was the magic of it for me, realizing, like, oh, I am far more equipped for this than I thought I was. And I think, last thing I'll say, most wannabe filmmakers that I talk to, the thing that tends to hold them up the most is, I don't know anything about cameras. I don't know anything about lighting. What is Adobe Premiere? Like, all of those things that are terrifying, and I realized, like, oh, I don't have to be an expert in that to do this. I have to bring in people who are passionate about the same story to be the expert in those fields.
So I want to piggyback off of that, talking about dealing with people, because people are everywhere, and there's different personalities that you'll be working with. I told this to my students, is that you got to have a thick skin being in this field. Not that it'll happen, but you know, there will be times that you might get yelled at by people and they'll cuss you out, or they'll do something while you're in the process of trying to put on this good show or trying to shoot something. A lot of that happens a lot, and it's a little bit different from film, but I think another thing that me and Charity that kind of sets us apart too is that we have a background in broadcast. So we also deal with television, live production. If you've never done live production, you should do it just to see how much you'll freak out. Because it's a whole different animal, because once it's live, it's there. And you can't, if something messes up, it's just there, you know. And I think with us working with live television, it's almost like working with live television compared to filmmaking. It's a little bit easier because sometimes film is not live. You can do 3, 4, 5, 100 takes versus doing something in broadcast. You only have that one shot to do it. So kind of learn to do stuff on the fly. But like I said, you're dealing with different types of people, and you're dealing with different directors. Some of them have very short tempers. So you have to learn how to deal with people dealing with that. And sometimes when I've had a really stressful day getting yelled at by a director, I'm like, why am I even in this field? I don't want to get yelled at all day. And one of the things I've had to learn, one, don't take it seriously. It's easier said than done. Two, come up with getting thick skin. There will be times in your life where you're not going to take any guff from anybody. So they might be accusing you or something until you do something, and it's one of those times where you got to stand up for it, because they're probably more in the wrong than you are. I'm not saying you're just going to stand up and start, flailing fists in the air, but there will be certain situations where you're like, no, this is the way it's supposed to happen. I don't care what you say. And I'm not saying to be defiant, but you got to stand up for yourself sometimes. And that kind of comes, that comes with experience, because you're not always able to, it's a jarring thing when you're in that situation. But that's something you don't learn in school, dealing with humans. So I try to tell them that, because not everything is going to be flowers and lollipops and skipping down the hill. But the end product is what you're going for, and that's the reward that you're going to get. So I just kind of wanted to, I thought I kind of went in lines as you're going to be dealing with people of different natures and personalities. I think that goes with every type of field.
I would like to piggyback actually on that a little bit more. In the dealing with people thing, and I feel like I would be doing a disservice to all of you if I did not mention this. So, you know, we're talking about generally the creative side of doing this and getting into it, a little bit of the technical stuff, and that's all very important. But there's another aspect when you take on a project as large as the ones we have, and that is there's a legal side. And I learned this lesson the hardest way. So I'm going to tell you this story briefly as I can. So my second documentary debuted 3 years ago this week. It was a documentary about a local musician, very popular, in a horrific car crash that killed her mother and niece and left her with a very severe head trauma. And she was the only survivor of this wreck, very popular locally. And so she got out of rehab. I approached her about doing a film about her comeback, and which we did, and it culminated with you know, this comeback concert she had, you know, with her head still kind of, you know, and I just poured my heart and soul into this story, and was very proud of the documentary that I made. And then we had a premiere event outdoor on a beautiful setting. We raised $13,000 for her medical expenses. And then about a week later, she says, "Hey, there's this thing I don't like." And it was just like a word in the lower thirds. And I said, "Well, it's done, you know, I can't change it. The film's out, you know, I mean, no, I'm sorry, I can't fix it." And then a week later, we get a call from an attorney. And even though we, meaning the Wichita Eagle, McClatchy, own the copyrights of the film, she says, "I'm no longer allowing you the use of my music in the film." The whole movie was built around her music. So she withdrew permission, and I didn't get anything signed saying, so in documentaries, you're using other people's photos, you're using stock video, everything. Make sure everything has legal permission for you to use. And I've seen, every time I go to one of these documentaries here and I'll watch something, I'm like, boy, I wonder if they're using this legally. Like, because, you know, that was another thing I got in journalism school, was a semester in communications law. And there's a law to, like, you know, what is fair use? You know, what's the copyright on this? Can you use more than 10 seconds of this? And I see people go beyond that all the time, and I wonder, oh, man, it'd cost an arm and a leg for you to buy a license for that. And I passed on a lot of footage in my most recent thing because just the license for like maybe 7 seconds of footage was going to cost $1,000. So I had a documentary completely die and will never be seen again because I didn't take care of the legalese. So that's like when you're taking on a huge project, man, I can't stress that enough. Make sure that you have permission for everything, and make sure that like people know who owns a copyright, in case somebody later on says, "Man, I don't like that pimple on my head, take me out of your film." You know, just got to make sure everything is totally locked down.
I would say do that with people that you know too. So even if you're gonna make a video for church, for your YouTube video, whatever, you're like, "Oh, I've known Pastor Bob for 13 years. It's fun." Get her to sign something. You know, make sure you each have a copy of what you signed. You know, that's just gonna cover your head, especially even if it's something that you've had in your project folder for a long time. And you're like, "You know what? I think I want to submit this now." You know, he was fine with it back in 2010 when he recorded it. It's 2022, you want to submit it. He's like, "You know what? I don't like that anymore." If you have that paperwork signed, you're covered.
Yeah, what's the saying, like, contracts save friendships. or something like that. Like, and it's the truth, because over time, I mean, these things live forever. Let's go back out to the audience. Were there any other questions?
I just kind of want to follow up with that. It's like, is just handing them a printed piece of paper with all of the, and making them sign it and then saying that, is that enough, or do you need more of a legal process of like, you know, a notary or anything like that? Like, what do you guys use to?
Well, I mean, you can get, I think, the correct legal documents essentially online, I think. And essentially, in the case of narrative films, what you're looking for is a model release. It's just a thing that says, I submit to using, you know, knowing that this thing could be made for this film to generate revenue, and I am entitled to either none or some of that revenue, whatever the contract says. But I don't think it has to be notarized or anything. It just has to state in the clearest of terms, and someone has to sign it and know what they're signing. That's my understanding.
I found templates online, like when Sarah and I have done personal stuff, there's usually some sort of template online, and usually I'll add to that. So like my document is usually twice as long as whatever the template is, just to make sure I'm covering my end. We also both work at the local PBS station here at Channel 8, and we've done stuff sort of in partnership with them, and so they actually have their own paperwork with their own letterhead, so that's not something that we had to, you know, get into. That was something that their legal department took care of. We just had to make sure that they signed it.
Yeah, on the first project, well, not any project, the first thing you always need is a script, a completed script. But if you're going into a project for the first time and you're like struggling with trying to get it written, like I've had situations where I come up with a good script idea and can't think of a good ending to save my life. I've also considered maybe I should try and make something out of somebody else's script. So if you're going into this thing for a first time, what do you think is the best way to go about it? Should you try to write your own script, or would you recommend trying somebody else's script if you can't come up with an idea or get it all out there?
Write a treatment. I don't know if you ever heard of that phrase before.
Yes, I have.
That's helped me a whole lot, because I'm not worried about formatting. I'm not worried about dialogue. I just write. And things, you know, it works out with me and Charity working together. So if I hit a block somewhere, we can kind of brainstorm and kind of figure something out. I mean, we do stuff separately too, but we mainly do a lot of stuff together. So writing a treatment has helped me a lot, a whole lot. Another thing, and I guess just depends on, you know, what kind of style of films you want to do or whatever. I like to kind of do little mind games. Sometimes I might play around with a plot generator. It might give me some weird off-the-wall thing, you know, some Yeti that lives in the Arctic is going to provide soup for the villagers, or something weird like that. And yeah, well, the reason why I say that is because that's actually something I use for my students. One of the games that we play is that we use a plot generator for them to work on their idea, and then they have to do something.
Expensive, though.
Well,
Yeti costumes, settings.
well, I showed them a practical way to do it. I'm not expecting Spielberg from my students. It's just how are they able to execute. So it's just kind of playing around with that. But yeah, when it comes to like trying to figure out where do I start, sometimes I just write it. Like I said, I don't really worry about formatting or anything. Sometimes I kind of like writing in an outline form, you know? Or maybe I start figuring out like, maybe I have an idea for a character, but I don't know about the story yet, or something like that. So I think people get too hung up on, let me write a script, and they're not really thinking of like the concept of it. And so I think it's one of those maybe cart before the horse kind of things. So don't worry about, you know, can I format this and, you know, 1/2-4 margins and you know, should I use these, you know, hole punches and all that kind of stuff. I would say just write your story, just put it on some random Word document. Or keep a notebook with you. Like something weird, I come across with the most weirdest ideas just randomly in the middle of the day, or at 3 a.m. And then I just kind of randomly jot something. Hopefully I'm awake enough that it makes sense when I look at it later. But even just the random things, and you might be able to make a story out of that. There's still stuff that I randomly wrote down when I was like 12 years old, and I was waiting for when I got real old, like 20, to put these things together. But it's crazy that some of the ideas I thought about at 12, I'm actually starting to revisit now, and they were actually pretty good. I didn't know how to do stuff when I was a teenager, and so now I have the way to do it. So you'd be surprised the random ideas that get into your head. So even if you think of a title first, if a title pops into your head, like, oh, that's a great title. All I need is a movie to go with it. You know, just start writing stuff down. So don't worry about the formatting.
Something I found out during COVID and lockdown, and you're in the same place for a long period of time, changing locations actually helps spark that creativity. So I have like my little office desk upstairs, and that's usually where I'm doing all my classes and writing and all that. And sometimes I'll hit a block. The simplest thing I did, I was like, you know what, why don't I go downstairs? And then I worked from the kitchen table for a while. And for whatever reason, that seemed to work. Or go outside or try a different coffee shop. Don't go to the Starbucks on 29th and Rock every single time. Go somewhere else, right? So changing up the location probably would help if you come into those blocks.
Is it best to focus on your own written material if you're starting your first production, as opposed to maybe like just buying a script or from somebody else and then trying to make their movie your own way or collaborating with them? Or is it
I
best
don't
to
have
start with your own?
experience with that.
Well, I mean, my first response would be, what's a script? Because I was a documentarian, I kind of believe in this idea of like, I'm just going to go out and collect the stuff. The story is going to decide what the story is. I'm not going to decide what the story is before. But that's for documentaries. I would say though, I think it doesn't matter whether you start with your own or start with somebody else. It's just a matter of what's the story that you think is going to inspire you to do the best film you can, regardless of, I think like every story, there's I didn't think that like when I went into this film festival that, and I'm still self-conscious of this, I'm not a religious person at all, but yet here I've made 2 documentaries about a priest, and I think nobody's going to want to watch that, but it's the story that came to me, so I almost feel like it's my responsibility. I think that can be true in narrative. There's going to be something in your life experience that's going to make you best suited, qualified for whatever specific story comes to you, whether it's your own or somebody else's.
Well, I feel like you would still, I feel like you would still change someone else's script a little bit, right? Like even if you are partnering with someone, like you're gonna add your input to it. So either way, whether you're writing your own script or you're partnering with someone else, you're still gonna add stuff to it. So you're still writing.
I think we have 3 major resources when we make anything. We have time, we have money, usually limited quantities of both of those, and you have your passion. And like at the end of the day, the passion has to drive this very, arduous process through to completion out into the world. So I would say, if you are so passionate about the story that you need to write, then that's the one you have to do. If you are passionate about someone else's story, which sometimes happens, sometimes you see something or read something and you're like, this is my story, even though you wrote it, this is keeping me up at night. It's like, then that's the story you have to do. I would caution you from choosing the easier path because, again, I think down the stretch that resource might die. Your passion might wane if you aren't compelled to tell this story. I would also say, again, from the narrative side, I think you have one chance to make the script work, and that's in the writing. Anything in production, you're not going to be able to, in my opinion, you can't solve the script in production, and you certainly can't solve it in post as much as you think you can outsmart the process. So take the time to get the script you love. That's what I would say.
I'll add one more bit. So we have been talking about, because we have done documentaries, and yes, it's, what we're doing, it's based off of true events, but you still have to make a legit story out of it. And yes, we do see the stuff unfold, but you have to be able to, tell that in a way that it makes sense and make people wonder, oh, what happens next? I mean, I know it happened 100 years ago, but really, what happens next? And at least for the very first film I actually did have a narrator to kind of narrate parts of the documentary. So I didn't have to write a script for a narrator to, you know, say what he needed to. But I think there's this weird thing between fiction and nonfiction where I think if it's a true story, it'll just roll over and tell itself. But you know, I mean, but there's aspects to true stories that might be a bit too mundane, that might not necessarily, it's good to tell, but is it necessary for the film? You know, or is it, you know, some things it's good, but it might be a little too off base. You don't want to get too far left field. You still got to keep the topic at hand, kind of thing. I think that was the thing we dealt with Roger Rabbit, because unlike Wonderland Park, the amusement park lasted 12 years, which is a pretty good life for amusement parks at the turn of the century. It was hard, so hard finding information for that. And it's still a pretty obscure story because it's been lost through time. With Roger Rabbit, we had too much information. And so trying to work with, it was weird for me because I'm working with something I'm having to stretch to make it make sense. Versus Roger Rabbit, we had to be able to be like, okay, well, maybe we might not talk about this now. This part makes more sense. It's still a true story, but you're still having to cherry pick certain things. And I think that still works with narrative too, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. There's still aspects that, you know, will make a great story or might drag out too far, or some things like, oh, we should have kept that in, or something like that. So I still think it works whether you're doing true or not, in terms of telling a story.
Are there any other questions out here?
So I had a question about legal contracts in regards to like hiring under 18 talent or crew members. How would you go about doing that with, let's say, someone 16 or 17, would their parents or guardians have to like, also, would you recommend that as well, having the talent sign and their family or guardian? Like how would you go about that?
They have to.
I don't know, but I would assume a lot of places, maybe not here, that there are unions that oversee a lot of that stuff. Like a filmmakers union. I don't know if there's anything like that locally, but I would assume you've dealt with that, right?
Yeah, it's definitely its own rule book. And Cricket, yeah, I feel like you might have some information on this, but yeah, I think there's definitely info out there on probably SAG-AFTRA. Whether they're a union or not, I would say following the union protocols for minors is really important. And, you know, just doing as much research beforehand, because those parameters are so specific, it will affect your production. Like minors, you know, I want to say they're like a 6-hour day max. And night shoots become very, very difficult if you're shooting during school hours, having to provide an on-set tutor, depending on how long your shoot is. So all of those things, which again comes back to the writing process. You know, if you have a story that needs to be told through the point of view of a young person, like then that's, again, I think the story you have to tell, but from a budgeting and production standpoint, you have to prepare for that, you know. When do you film? Perhaps you do it over spring break or summer break. You know, these night scenes that I envision, could they happen at twilight instead? You know, even aging a character from 13 to 16 and being able to cast a really young-looking 18-year-old can solve a lot of your problems. So just knowing that those are, you know, problems that you'll have to produce around as early as possible